All right, so what I want to do is go through the difference between solids and shapes. So under layer new, there is a solid and then there's also a shape. Okay, so a solid is a square or rectangle. It's whatever resolution you punch in here, and it's a color there. You can pick the color. And that's pretty much all it is. And if I go in here and I go to transform, I see all the attributes that you would typically have for most items. Typically you would use a solid if you just needed a flat color. I just need blue, red, green, whatever it is. Or if I needed to add an effect onto here. If I'm going to go to, let's say, generate and add a 4-color gradient, typically I would create a solid and then do a 4-color gradient, and then that effect is on top of that solid. Or if I'm going to go to generate and create a gradient. There we go. Or go to generate here and add radio waves. And if I hit play, you can see the radio waves. Okay, so there's a lot of times you'll use a solid when you are needing a flat color, or you're going to be applying one of these things to this solid to get it to look a different way. Now you could also click on the solid and you could also use the pen tool or use the rectangle tool here to cut out different shapes of it and create different shapes besides just the rectangle. If I click and hold here, let's say I went to ellipse and I click and drag, I'm not creating a shape. What I'm doing is creating a mask on top of that solid. Okay, so when I do that, this solid then gets a mask that I could use as an add. I could use as a subtract, an intersect if I had more, or darken or difference. You know, I have different operations. Typically, add or subtract are the two that you're going to use. And realistically, for most of the time, you can typically leave it at add and then say invert, unless you have multiple masks. Then you need to play with, you know, the other settings here. Okay. Opening up mask, because that's a new option we have. Now we have this mask path shape. And if I click on it, it gives me the exact coordinates of the bounding box. I can reset the shape to be whatever. Typically I don't use these, but they're there. You can keyframe this. So if I were to keyframe this here, scoot up a little bit, go to my selection tool, and then I selected and moved the points, I could definitely animate the animation of this thing. Now, by default, it kind of grabs all of them, so sometimes you have to click off and then click back on the mask. Oops, the mask path. There we go. Come on. Okay, and then we can animate that shape inside here. Okay, so that's something that definitely you could do for animating that mask shape. And then any effect that you would have added to this, generate radio waves, you'll see that the mask is no longer applied. The mask is just it's on there, but it's just overriding the shape of that. And you would have to use other means to get that to work. In some instances, you'll use the mask and it will be how the item is being cut out or being used or whatever. So the write-on effect here, I can actually take this path, hit Control C, open up my effects now that I have an effect on there, go to my brush position and just paste it, and now what it's going to do is it'll actually write on that shape. Okay, so you can see how it's writing that on there, and I'll take the brush hardness up, I'll take the brush spacing down, there we go, and now I have this outline where it's actually drawing that shape. Okay, so that's where the masks and the mask paths come in. Now the other one that you would sometimes use would be just a shape. So I don't have anything selected down here. You don't have to go up here to new shape layer. You can simply just click on the shape and then just click and drag, and now you've created that shape. And the reason for this is that you get different options. It's not just a solid with that mask. You actually get this new area that says contents, and inside there is ellipse. And inside here is ellipse path, stroke, fill, and then the transform ellipse. So there's a regular transform for the entire shape, and then there's a transform ellipse, which is for that specific shape that you drew here. And in this, you can see here's the position, here's the scale, here's the skewing, which is different. Obviously, we didn't have a skew before. There's rotation, there's opacity, and then under fill, we have the above or below, we have filling rules, we have the color, so we can change the color right here. There's opacity, so you can actually make that transparent right there. There's also a stroke, so you can take the stroke width up, give the stroke a different color. And then all of these options for stroke and fill are also up here at the top. Here's the fill, here's the stroke, there's the stroke width. If you click on the word, you'll get the kind of stroke that you, or the kind of fill that you're putting on here. So right now it's a solid fill. I could say no fill, and it'll be like totally transparent in the middle. I could say linear gradient, or I could say radial gradient. I could also choose, maybe I want to use this as a multiply or a whatever, okay? Or take the opacity and adjust that as well, okay? So a lot of options there. Even on the stroke itself, you can click on the word stroke and do the same thing. I can have the stroke be a gradient or a linear gradient, or change the opacity and all that other stuff. If you do make any of these gradient, if you just click on the swatch afterwards, then you'll get the gradient options. And then you can play with where that gradient is actually affecting that item. So here I'm not really seeing a huge change. Let's make that linear. You'll see that a little bit better. Yep, there we go. Give us a little different color, maybe blue. Okay, and then with this still up, if I just click and drag, oops. There we go. There we go. If I come into the gradient stroke here, here's the start point, here's the end point, so I can adjust where these are at. So by clicking this end point, I can move that end this way or that way. I can adjust the start point this way or that way, and obviously up and down as well. So if I want to put this on an angle, I could say edit gradient, and again it'll pull that menu up. Here's the stroke width, the kind of caps that we have there, which we'll get into. So there's a huge difference in the options that become available. Typically, you're going to use a shape layer for something that you want to do a little bit more than just solid colors with some effects on it. With this kind of thing, typically you could draw out entire objects, characters, whatever, and use this. With this shape layer selected, if I were to go in here and grab, let's say, the star tool, and I clicked and dragged, and then I went to my arrow tool and moved this, I actually have the star tool here, and I have this tool here too. And whichever one I'm clicked on, I'll be able to change the color of just that one. And then using some of these other options, I could play with how these things are interacting with each other. That'll be a different lecture, okay? Now, typically when I draw a shape layer, let's say I'm going to do a circle, I want a perfect circle, I would just go to the circle and then I would double click, and it'll create it inside here and fill the entire screen. Then I'll come into the ellipse settings, go down to the ellipse path, and just take the size, and if I want this to be a perfect circle, I'm going to uncheck that and just put in, let's say, 500 by 500. Then I can hit my lock, and now that's all locked in. Okay, so this is the actual like size of the original item as it was created. It's also perfectly centered. Obviously I have my color here still, my transforms are all set up here, these transforms are all set up there. Okay, so this is a really good way to kind of start off creating just a very basic shape right in the center. And you can do the same thing for a rectangle, rounded, polygon, star, and so on. Okay, so each one of these has their own options too, so something you could play with if you go to the star. There it is, and then I open the star settings, and you'll see here's the path, and then here's all the points. So you may have a specific, amount of points you want. You may have a specific radius you want for each one of these things. Roundness, and then outer roundness. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that obviously you can do just by using some of these basic shapes. Okay, so that's the difference between solids and shapes.